So we kind of talked about how women and girls were affected by purity culture more.
Yeah,
So
no question.
You've probably talked to more of them than I have, being a church counselor.
Sure.
So go.
Okay. In other words, like what's the experience or their takeaway or whatever. Right. Yeah. So let me kind of just summarize, because I think it's kind of picking up from the last episode, but just real quick. Yeah. In the purity culture, it was really aimed at the girls, because the assumption was that boys have all these sexual desires. Girls don't really have these sexual desires as much, and the boys couldn't control theirs.
Right.
But the girls can control theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the girls were basically put in this position of having to protect both themselves and the boy from sex. And so girls had to dress modestly. They had to be careful how they flirted.
And that would be against Christian hierarchy in relationships between men and women, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Like
where it's on the woman to be the protector.
Yeah, that's like, roles are flipped in that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because in Christianity, you would have to give the onus on boys. You can control yourself too. Like, let's just call it for what it is. Yes, you got hormones raging through you, but if you know the Lord, the Holy Spirit's there, you can have self-control. But there's also this sense of, and this is a big important piece for Christianity, is honoring one another.
Okay.
And there has to be a sense of honoring one another, that I can't just expect the girl to be like this, again, the one who's having to protect both the boy and herself from having sex. Like the boy should honor the girl enough to want to abide by a Christian sexual ethic to honor her. And I think by just telling the girl that it's all on them, we've stripped the boys of their responsibility to honor, and then, as you talked about a second ago, but also to protect. And so that there is a sense of, men, you're created to protect, and so you need to protect her in this vein as well.
Okay.
And so, so they had to always be the one to say no to sexual advances. And then but what it left it with was, if they did have sex, then it was the girl's fault.
Right.
Because she didn't.
So she ruined it for not just herself, for somebody else.
Right.
Okay.
And that's just, what a terrible, and even if that was never explicitly stated, that is the outcome, right?
Right.
Like, if you're told you have to say no, you have to protect yourself and him, right? You have to be the one to steer them away from sex. But then when you have sex, so then who does that fall on? It falls back on you, the girl. And so, and that's insanely, I don't know what I want to say to that. I mean, it's just not, it's beyond not fair. It's just not right. And then if she becomes pregnant, it's even worse for her, because now she may be ostracized at church, while the boy basically is excused from it, because, like, well,
it wasn't his fault.
It wasn't his fault. I mean, he has urges. What's he supposed to do? Right. And
you let him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've been in situations where girls were basically told, "You whore. How did you let this happen?" Like, what are we?
And then the dude's on to the next one.
Right. Yeah. And we're like, what are we talking about here? And so,
like at church, you've heard that?
Oh yeah. Like in counseling,
okay,
girls will share, "Hey, this is what I was told," and we find, my wife and I do a lot of counseling, especially with couples about to get married. And so but beyond that as well, but especially in couples who are about to get married. And when my wife is meeting and discussing sex with the young lady, there's so much that's brought up from this purity culture. There's so much the idea of sex being wrong and sex being bad. And it's like when we start talking about sex as a holy act, that's like mind blowing for most people, for both the male and the female. When we start talking about sex as a gift from God, never thought about it that way. And so it's having to almost like rewire the brain a little bit. And because it's interesting, because what you can run into is they may both be excited about it, but especially with the female, feel shame after it happens, or tensing up as they're having sex. Because again, the brain was wired for so long to sex is bad, sex is wrong, sex is sinful. And yes, we don't want sex. We would want to encourage our kids to not have sex outside of the bonds of marriage, but we don't want to teach them that sex in and of itself is an unholy act.
Okay.
Right? Because it's holy in the confines of, or in the sacred, covenant of marriage. And so I think we see a lot of that with the young girls, about working through basically from what they were taught to now. All right, let's let you experience some freedom. Let's let you begin to see sex differently. And then, so that's a large part that we see in our counseling with young ladies.
So if it's on girls to say no all the time, then aren't they saying no all the time?
Yeah.
So
a lot of them are.
So doesn't all sex feel like I'm not doing what I want to do?
What do you mean?
At some point? How does getting married, how does getting married supposed to flip that switch?
Right.
To where this is okay now? Because that makes sense why people are having so much problems with it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's because you really are asking them to flip a switch magically overnight.
Right.
And for
literally.
And some of them can do that. And there's a lot that can't. And I think the ones who can are the ones, even if they went through purity culture, they had someone in their life, some female mentor, a mom, somebody spoke into their lives and helped them get a better view of sex. And so, but for those that don't have someone like that, actually the wedding night in itself, can be scary.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's not uncommon for us to come across that either. So yeah, what you said is absolutely right. Another problem that comes out of this, right, is if girls are taught that boys are going to be the ones to be the aggressors, to want to have sex, and they're always being told to say no, 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 no. What it actually encourages is abuse and sexual abuse.
It encourages the male abuse from both people's sides, right?
I think what it does, for the male, it lets them off the hook, and so it says, push for it, right?
Okay.
But I think more in particular for the female, what it's doing is that it's framing it as, when I'm being pushed or pressured into having sex, that's normal.
Okay.
When reality is, that's not, like, you shouldn't, your existence in a relationship shouldn't be a constant having to say no to somebody because they're trying to force themselves on you. I mean, that's horrible, right? I mean,
so you're saying it's just normalizing the saying no behavior.
Correct.
Okay.
And it also is taking away what that no means. Right?
Right.
Because if we're told, like in kind of modern day society, you're told, hey, if you don't want to engage in an act of sex, say no. And if you say no and the person keeps persisting and sex happens, we call that rape. In this culture,
purity culture,
you're told to keep saying no, keep saying no, keep saying no. And I think there's a lot of girls who finally cave in after a period of time, and it might as well be rape. Because the boys are not told to honor that. No.
Right.
And so it's horribly painful for some of those girls who have gone through this, and they've really wanted to be able to stay faithful, be virgins when they get married, and they just are just being pressured all the time. And someone's not telling them, hey, if you're being pressured all the time, this guy's not he is actually not looking out for you and your best interest. He actually is not the one you want to marry.
But the boys are being told that they're off the hook if they do it.
Yeah.
Purity culture.
Yeah. Because a lot of times it's just not even addressed. That's
Right.
the problem. That's what I was saying earlier. One of the problems with purity culture is there's not enough healthy conversation happening.
Okay.
And I think it plays itself out right here, because there's nothing in purity culture that's telling boys, go push yourself on someone. Definitely not saying go rape somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, it's also not telling them how to handle that situation between them and the female.
What situation?
When they're right at the point of wanting to, sex. When they're pushing for sex, we'll put it that way.
So it's not teaching the boys to say, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just not giving, and it's not teaching the boys, hey, when you get to that point, you need to honor her. Right?
Okay. Right.
And whether she's saying, if she's saying no, you definitely got to honor that.
Right.
And so it's just I think that's part of the lack of the conversation. There's just not enough conversation in purity culture. There's a lot of teaching, a lot of lectures. There's not enough conversation and discussion.